The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept, and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today, today is March 13th, the first day of daylight savings time, at least in the United States. And this is the Zazenkai for March. When we don't have a pair of sessions in a given month, we try to do a Zazenkai as well, so that all of us have an extra opportunity to do deeper practice than would ordinarily be afforded through just regular daily practice. There's a saying, may you live in interesting times. It's supposedly a curse, sometimes attributed to Jewish communities, sometimes attributed to the Chinese. I don't know where it came from, but the basic fact is that we now live in interesting times. Of course, that term interesting has got a lot of clout to it. As a curse, of course, it means may you have a devil of a time just existing. But what it means to us, particularly in Zen practice, and excuse me, let me get a drink of water. This is sort of climbing over this frog in my throat all the time. What this means to us as Zen students is a tremendous opportunity. If things are going on swimmingly, everything is fine, happy, we have no problems, life is easy and joyful even, what motivation is there to go beyond the surface? And yet, as the wording, I think it is to the Diamond Sangha, one of the Bodhisattva vows, greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly. And sooner or later we get caught in it, or experience it, or see it happening to people around us. And right now it's been quite amazing. We've had 2 years and counting of a pandemic that has taken literally millions of lives in a brutal, brand new, it seems, illness, a plague really, that initially was, we were blindsided by and scrambled to find some means to deal with that would be effective in preventing further cases. At this point, it is a relatively low case level, but we are being warned that it's not a good idea to get our confidence up too soon, and the thing could rise again. There could be a new variant that could be at least as potent as the current one, and so forth. In addition, we have a tremendous amount of antagonism politically in the United States, and as if that weren't enough, we now have a brutal war happening in Ukraine, which threatens to spread further into Europe, and is because we are so interconnected globally, impacting all countries. It's a fertile ground for practice. Whenever we are caught in a difficult feeling, in a felt need to escape, it's important, rather than to act on that feeling to escape, unless of course your life is in danger, that's a very different circumstance. But if just a mind state And plenty of people are seriously bothered, understandably so, by what's going on in the world. Then, rather than continuing to try to think our way through it, because as you've heard so many times here, thinking just gets more stories. And we can talk for hours, for days, for weeks, for months, and never see a true, deep, freeing resolution. But if we sit and turn our awareness within, beyond words, sinking deep down into the very basis of our being, there we have the potential to open to something far more freeing than ever could be had through talk. Sure, this war could resolve one way or another. It doesn't look like it's going to resolve without a lot more brutality, without a lot more negative, painful effects on everybody, everywhere. But imagine that it did. Then, when would the next thing come along that would be disturbing, unsettling, uncomfortable? There are so many things in the world today, even without a war, even without the acrimony among politics, even without the pandemic, that are causes of pain and suffering to millions of people. And yet there is something different. And we aren't sitting here today without that deep down sense that difference is possible. And it is. For getting close to 3 millennia, there's been a spiritual practice that has been experienced over and over again through all those years and has freed countless human beings regardless of their circumstances. There is the story of the Chinese master from centuries ago. I don't remember which dynasty he was in, but he was a deeply committed Zen teacher, a deeply awakened Zen master. And when word of his abilities and his depth reached the emperor demanded that he come and teach the court. And the master, recognizing that, first of all, the people in the court were not particularly interested in liberation. They were living in a kind of a tush to heaven. Well, maybe that's a little bit extreme, but they were living in a very positive seeming situation. Wealth, admiration, advantage. And yet he knew he had students who were deeply committed to realizing what he had realized and becoming free, and eventually taking that realization and that understanding to teach others in further generations, so that the practice, the ability to come to this true liberation would be carried down the centuries. And so he refused. Well, in those days, you didn't say no to the emperor, apparently. And he sent somebody to appeal to him, again, more completely. And again, that person, the personal emissary, was refused. And so, highly annoyed, the emperor condemned the monk to death. And the master said, I will come, please give me a week so that I can write down most important instructions for my students. And so he was granted that, amazingly. And after the week was up, he presented himself to the emperor and was said to be executed. And he wrote a poem, apparently, just before the execution, in which he said something about the sword that takes off my head is no different from the spring wind. And he was duly executed. Rumor has it, I don't know if this is just hagiography, but rumor has it that when his head was sliced off, milk ran from his veins, from his arteries. What did that man understand? That he could meet death in that way? And countless other people through the generations have had deep enough experiences that they have also met death or impending death seamlessly. When Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche's father, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, was dying, it wasn't that clear that he was dying, apparently, because he was sitting up in bed, speaking with his sons, all of whom were apparently quite eminent Buddhist teachers. Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche is, of course, the young man who is the author of In Love with the World, Travels Through the Borders of Living and Dying by a Zen monk, or by a monk. A monk's travels through the bardos of living and dying. It's a highly, highly, highly recommended book. And his brothers are, I believe, all still contemporary. So when their father was dying, they knew that the time was fairly close, but they didn't know exactly when. And he was chatting with his sons and asked to be helped to the bathroom. Returned, sat in meditation. And it wasn't until one of the brothers realized that his father was not breathing anymore that they recognized that he had died. There was no anguish, no anxiety, no holding back, no attempts to stay alive, just simply moving on. There are many stories of enlightened people who met great adversity, threat even, and without fear. There's the Japanese story of the samurai, and in one of the reasons why Zen actually took off in Japan is because the samurai became interested in Zen practice as a way of dealing with death and dying, and so it became popular as a result of that. So there is the story of the samurai going to the Zen master before a battle and saying, "Tell me, master, what is heaven and what is hell?" And the master, as most of you know, said, "How would you understand such a thing, dumb as you are?" And of course, the samurai reacted in rage, unsheathed a sword, prepared to slice off the master's head. And the master said, "That's hell." And the samurai wasn't so dumb as he was accused of being, recognized what the master was saying, calmed down, sheathed the sword, relaxed, and the master said, and that's heaven. We all will encounter many different experiences in our life, some of them pleasant, some of them unpleasant. I'm hoping that for pretty much all of you, it is the major experiences are pleasant. But on the other hand, unpleasant experiences can motivate us to go deeper and to uncover what that master was saying, what the Chinese master knew personally, what so many masters know personally. The Buddha, when he was dying, no problem. What is it that these people know? And how about right now for you? It is something that we can realize. It's been proven many times over. And in that realization, if it goes deeply enough, it is freeing in ways that cannot be expressed in words, such that no matter where one is in one's life, whatever circumstances there is no problem. And here I think of Jacques Lutheran, the blind man who was incarcerated in Buchenwald, the notorious death camp of the Nazis. And after 5 months, he became deathly ill, and he was dying, actually. And they carried him away to die. But instead of dying, he tuned in. And instead of dying, he became so intimately familiar with every sense of energy in his body that he had a deep awakening experience instead. And he survived, which is how we know about it. This is a true story. And after that, there were 8 more months before the Allied forces liberated the Nazi death camps. And no one stole his bread anymore. Desperate prisoners had been stealing any bit of food they could, and being blind, he was particularly vulnerable to that. But no longer did that happen. And instead, they cleared the way. They gave him space and led him to people who were freaking out in terror at all the horrors of that camp. And it was still alive for him, that depth of freedom. At least 2 decades later, when he was teaching in the United States, a university professor. And his students were so impressed by his demeanor that they asked him about his history. And he told them, and somebody wrote it down. And now we can read it ourselves. There he was in the midst of hell, free. So free, he was able to help free others in that environment. I hope none of us end up in a hell realm, but for some people, just being alive right now in what's going on in this world is enough of a hell realm to be in. But know that liberation is within your own hands. True liberation. true freedom, to be within whatever circumstances there are in your life, and yet be free, unburned by them. And it is through Zazen, in the Zen sect, that we find that freedom. In many different religions, there are ways to do this. One of the advantages of Zen practice is that it is, at least in Rinzai Zen, it is handed down through experience. It's not a dead teaching. It's handed down through experience. In the Rinzai sect, teachers are required to have had Kensho before they can teach, and it's a lot more than that. So there's an authentic trail, a handed down person to person means of coming to awakening and understanding, perception that makes it possible for a person coming to awakening to be acknowledged. Excuse me. Excuse me. As having had an authentic Kensho experience. This is essential. You're here now. Zen practice requires that we walk bravely into whatever mind states we have, with hands open, ready to allow ourselves to discern, to open to experience, to be curious about these different mind states, and to understand through that curiosity and that openness and that willingness to walk in as to the source of them. And going deeply enough into that, we find the source, and through that, we become free. This is the nature of Zen practice. It is something that we must be in for the long haul, because it doesn't work to do it sporadically, at least not for long. Although in the beginning, I can attest to the fact that sometimes it has to be done sporadically, as I did myself. But we have to stick to it. This is why the 3 pillars of Zen practice are a sense. It's called great doubt, but that's a funny word. A sense that there is something beyond, something within, something we've just barely lost touch with that is important to return to. And then there is great determination, which I sometimes call great stubbornness, to persist, to persist, to persist. Even wading through crocodile, poison snake full swamps within our own minds. It's the only way to become free, is to really explore where and how we're caught. And through that exploration, freedom will come, I guarantee it, if we go deeply enough. And the other is great faith. Faith that we really can do it. And we can. For many, many years, I was afraid that people at the Rochester Zen Center would kick me out because they would recognize that I really didn't have any faith at all. It's not faith in the Buddha. It's not faith in Zen. It's faith that you yourself can reach deeply within and become free. And that the method is there to guide you and to help you do it. And you can. You really can. And so now, in these interesting times, go for it. There's a tremendous meat to fuel your practice. Lots of adventure, lots of intensity. It's not going necessarily to be an easy trek, but it will be a fulfilling one. And ultimately, if you go far enough, deeply enough, you will become free. I guarantee it. So, I thank you for listening. And we'll stop now, recite the 4 vows. And of course, we still have about 15 minutes left before the end of the Zazen Kai. And so we'll continue to sit after this.